Alright folks, so I want to spend a few minutes here talking about purchasing your first handheld handy-talkie or HT ham radio. But before I do, why don't you go grab yourself a nice cold one, come on back, and we'll get started. Alright, so hopefully everybody made it back. And before we start the video, what I want to say is that if you're looking for a radio, a personal radio, something like that where you don't have to get licensed, go and look at an FRS or Family Radio Services radio. You do not need to be licensed to use one of those. You can also get a GMRS radio. This is a old school GMRS radio. And you can purchase your license. You don't have to pass a test. But in order to use any of these radios, you do need to pass the ham radio technician class test. Alright, so one of the questions I get asked a lot on my channel is, what should my first ham radio be? What should my first HT be? HT being handy talkie. And most people start out with an HT before they buy a mobile radio, a base station radio, a portable radio, or something like that. So it's only natural that when we talk about a first radio, first HT, it's an HT that we're going to talk about. And people say, hey, well, I don't want to spend a whole lot of money. This is not a hobby that I think I'm going to like. I don't know if I'm going to like it. I want it to be quick and easy. So most people will actually start out with something like this, which is a Baofeng UV5R. It's a 2 meter and 70 centimeter ham radio. It also can operate out of band, so it can operate on FRS and GMRS channels, MERS channels, and actually public works channels, which makes it a very controversial radio. It's not legal to operate that radio outside of ham bands or amateur radio service frequencies or amateur radio service bands, and that would be the 2 meter and 70 centimeter bands. There's some other things about this radio that cause a lot of drama, but there's a lot of reasons people like them. The first one is that some of these radios are not built with fantastic quality. And that means that they can generate what's called a spurious emission, or generate sounds or noises on frequencies other than the one that you're transmitting on. So a lot of people question the legality or the appropriateness of using a radio like that. What I like about these radios is that you can get a Baofeng for $25 to $50, depending upon the model that you choose. Some of the options will allow you to use a tri-band. So, for example, this one will operate on 2 meters, 1.25 meters, and 70 centimeters. It's a Baofeng. It costs a little bit more money. This one's about $50. They also have higher powered Baofengs that go 8 watts, 10 watts, where the UV5R, which is very, very popular, is typically a 5-watt radio. I just have this Baofeng here. This is a UV5R5 with an extended battery. I typically would encourage people to buy one of the UV5R styles because a lot of the parts, the batteries, the chargers are interchangeable. They're a decent radio to get. You'll learn a lot about radios. They're very difficult to program. You can use software like Chirp, and I have plenty of videos on how to program these radios and how to use Chirp to program these radios, so you can search my channel. But you learn a lot about radios when you buy something that you have to program manually as opposed to a radio like a Yaesu FT60, and we'll talk about that one in a minute, that picks things like your offset or repeater frequencies automatically. Anyhow, let's keep moving on. If you want to get an entry-level radio, the Baofengs are a reasonable option. There's pros and cons against getting them. But maybe you want to buy something that is a little bit more advanced. And so I have Yaesu FT60. This is an older radio. It's been around for more than 10 years. It has a nickel metal hydride battery. This is the only radio that has a non-lithium ion battery on the table. And by the way, this collection of radios is not an exhaustive list. It's just some of the radios that I have that I use. What's nice about these, they're generally a little bit easier to program. You can program them with Yaesu's software. You can program them with a Chirp program. Again, I mentioned that earlier. But what's nice is that some of the more challenging parts of programming a radio are automatically done. I have a video on repeaters and you can check that out. But when you communicate with a repeater, the repeater is a tower or a big antenna up in the air that you communicate to, and it relays your message to other people. Now, they use one channel or one station or one frequency to listen on and one for broadcasting. That's called an offset. There are standards for offsets in the United States, and so the Yaesu will auto-detect or is pre-programmed to help you program that offset into your radio, making programming of these without the use of a computer, without the use of software, much, much easier. It's about a $150 radio, so it costs significantly more than the Baofangs. A lot of people say, well, hey, $150, I could buy 5 or 6 Baofangs. That's true, but you get a much better radio with this. And so what I'm going to talk about now is the front end of a radio. So when your radio receives a frequency signal, people call that your front end. And what I mean by that is that the receiver on this radio uses something that's called a super heterodyne receiver. And it's a much higher quality and has more filters on the receiver than the Baofeng radios. So a lot of times what you see is people buy a Baofeng radio like this, and it comes with this stock antenna. People call this a rubber duck. And they can't pick up signals. And they say, oh, this rubber duck sucks. I'm going to put another antenna on there. So they might buy an aftermarket antenna like the one on this Yaesu FT60. This is a Nagoya antenna. And this antenna has better gain or better pickup, where it can pick up weaker signals or more distant signals than the antenna that comes on the Baofeng. Well, the Baofeng uses what's called a direct conversion receiver, which is a more basic receiver. And also the Baofengs use less quality parts. They have less filtering. So a lot of times they'll become overloaded with the signal, and you won't be able to pick it up. The radio will display static, and it will be difficult to hear what you're trying to understand. So that's a really good reason to look at something like a Yaesu. There's other radios of a higher quality that I'm not showing here, which is a Kenwood or an ICOM. I don't own any. Most of my radios are Yaesu or Baofeng, for a matter of fact. But a super heterodyne receiver is very nice. You also see one on this Yaesu FT70. And this is a newer model Yaesu, and what's nice about this radio is it has a digital mode called Yaesu System Fusion. And most of these radios are analog radios. Anyhow, the frequency here, or the signal here, is digitized. And it produces a little bit of a cleaner signal, a little bit of a cleaner sound, but that sound is also a little bit robotic from time to time. It sounds better on a YSF or Yaesu System Fusion radio than some of the other digital modes. We're going to talk a little bit about digital modes now, and one of my favorite radios is this B-Tech. It is a DMR 6X2, so DMR stands for Digital Mobile Radio. Now we're talking about a $200 radio. Now this radio uses a direct conversion, not a super heterodyne receiver like the Yaesu uses a super heterodyne receiver. But it has better quality parts and better filtering than some of the Baofangs. Now, even though this is called a B-Tech, it's resold by a company in the United States called Baofeng Tech. The radio itself is made by Anytone, which is a Chinese manufacturer, but it's a much better radio, a much better quality than you get on some of these B-Techs. And that's represented in the price that you pay for this radio. Now, it uses a mode, or it can use a mode, called DMR, Digital Mobile Radio, which is actually very nice. I prefer DMR over YSF or some of the other digital modes like D-Star, which is used by ICOM. Because it's an open standard, and then you can get other DMR radios, and it's become very popular because here's a Retevis RT84. Now, this is a DMR radio that uses direct conversion receiver, but isn't the same quality as the B-Tech. And you can pick this up for about $75 to $100, depending upon where you're shopping. And the reason I wanted to mention that is because it's a more affordable option, and there's other ones on the market. But these more affordable options allow people to get digital modes like DMR in their hands without spending $150 like you would for a Yaesu radio or $200 like you would for this B-Tech. Anyhow, the next thing I wanted to mention is that here's another Chinese-made. This is the iLunz HD1 digital or DMR radio. Again, this one uses a direct conversion receiver, but it can go up to 10 watts and has some waterproofing. It's a very rugged and durable radio, and I like it quite a bit, but I still prefer the Anytone, or the B-Tech, I should say. The last thing I was going to close out with saying is that there's actually some really cheap options, and these are ham radios that operate specifically on VHF, which is your 440 megahertz or 70 centimeter band. You can pick these up for about $12 to $15 a radio. They're very limited. There's no keypad on them. Everything's controlled by these knobs up top. There's no display. But again, it's a cheap way to get in once you're licensed. I did want to mention that most of these radios outside these two are dual band, and that means that they can communicate on two bands, the 2 meter and 70 centimeter band. The exception would be, and we talked about this earlier, this Baofeng UV82 is called a tri-band radio, and that means it can operate on 2 meters, 125, and 440. The UV82 also has a model that is a dual band model, but I don't have that one laying here somewhere around the house and I couldn't find it. Anyhow, I hope this helps when considering or buying a new HT or ham radio. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them below. I'll do my best to answer them. And thank you for watching the video. If you liked it so far, go ahead and click the thumbs up, subscribe, or share on your favorite social media site. Thanks, everybody.